Welcome back to the channel, folks. Tonight we're diving headfirst into the unsettling world of food delivery horror stories. We've all been there, right? Craving a late-night snack, maybe after a long day or a scary movie, and hitting that order button. But what we don't often think about are the people on the other side of that transaction, the drivers navigating the dark streets and unknown houses, just trying to make a living. Tonight's stories are about those drivers. We're exploring 3 real-life accounts, stories that'll make you think twice before ordering that midnight pizza. So lock your doors, lower the lights, and maybe keep that porch light burning a little brighter. Buckle in, because these stories are a wild ride. Our first story takes us to the rain-slicked streets of suburban Chicago, where a young delivery driver named Jake was finishing his Friday night shift. It was late, well past midnight, and the fatigue was starting to set in, making his eyes heavy. He was just about to call it a night when his phone buzzed. A new order. It was an address on the outskirts of town, a place he wasn't familiar with. The order was simple enough. 2 pizzas, extra pepperoni, and a large soda. Easy, right? Jake accepted the order, hoping for a decent tip that close to closing time, and started his car, the engine rumbling to life like a tired beast. Little did he know this seemingly ordinary delivery would send chills down his spine. The drive was uneventful at first, passing rows of darkened houses and the occasional stray cat darting across the wet asphalt. But as Jake ventured further from the familiar glow of the city, a sense of unease began to creep in. The streetlights became sparser, swallowed by pockets of darkness between their feeble glow. The houses, once uniform and well lit, gave way to overgrown yards and darkened windows like closed eyes watching him pass. The GPS guided him further down a narrow road, the digital voice seeming to echo unnaturally in the stillness of his car. He checked the address again. 1313 Ravenwood Lane. It was definitely the right place. As he approached the house, a wave of cold washed over him, despite the warmth of the heater blowing in his face. Something felt off, deeply and unsettlingly wrong. 1313. Ravenwood Lane was an imposing structure, shrouded in shadows and overgrown with ivy that seemed to claw at its walls like skeletal fingers. The paint was peeling and the porch light flickered intermittently, casting eerie, dancing shadows across the overgrown lawn. Jake took a deep breath, reminding himself it was just a delivery, just another house. He grabbed the pizzas and the soda, his hand lingering on the pepper spray clipped to his belt, a nervous habit he'd developed after a few too many late-night deliveries. As he approached the house, he noticed something peculiar. There, in the doorway, was a figure. It was tall and slender, almost skeletal, and it stood unnaturally still. His heart pounded in his chest. Was it a person, a trick of the light?
Delivery! 2 pizzas and a soda?
The figure didn't move. It just stood there, shrouded in the dim light, its features indiscernible. The air hung heavy with an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant chirping of crickets and the pounding of Jake's own heart. The flickering porch light finally gave out with a pop, plunging the figure into complete darkness. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He fumbled for his phone, the faint light from the screen doing little to pierce the oppressive darkness that now seemed to press against him, and then he heard it, a low, guttural sound, like someone struggling to speak, coming from the figure in the doorway. It sent a shiver down his spine, a primal fear he'd never known before. Our next story takes us to the bustling streets of Los Angeles, where Sarah, a college student new to the city, was taking on the graveyard shift for a popular food delivery app. She'd just started the job, eager to earn some extra cash, and was excited to explore the city under the cloak of night. One slow Tuesday evening, an order popped up on her phone, an address deep in the Hollywood Hills. The customer had requested contactless delivery, which wasn't unusual, and the tip was generous, almost suspiciously so. Intrigued by the large tip and feeling adventurous, Sarah accepted the order. She hopped into her beat-up Honda Civic, its headlights cutting through the thick smog that hung low in the city, and set off towards the Hollywood Hills, the glittering lights of the city sprawling beneath her like a sea of stars. Following the directions on her phone, Sarah navigated the winding, narrow roads that snaked through the Hollywood Hills. The houses became larger, hidden behind towering gates and dense foliage, each one a silent sentinel in the night. As she climbed higher, the GPS signal began to waver, the digital voice on her phone cutting in and out, becoming increasingly unreliable. She checked the address again, a prickle of unease running down her spine. The house number didn't seem to exist. She pulled over at the next turn, the engine ticking as it cooled, and tried to get her bearings. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and an unnatural stillness hung in the air. She could hear her own pulse throbbing in her ears. Where was she? Glancing at her phone, she noticed the battery was alarmingly low, the screen dimming with every passing second. Panic started to set in. She was lost, alone, and running out of time. Just as her hope began to dwindle, she saw it. A faint light flickering in the distance. Relief washed over her, a beacon in the oppressive darkness. Gathering her courage, she put the car in gear and slowly drove towards the light, hoping it would lead her back to civilization. As she drew closer, the outline of a house emerged from the shadows. It was a large, rambling structure, seemingly abandoned, with boarded-up windows and a rusted wrought-iron gate hanging precariously from its hinges. The light, she realized, was coming from a single bare bulb hanging above what was once a grand entrance. Despite its eerie appearance, the house represented a glimmer of hope. Maybe someone there could help her, point her in the right direction and get her back on track. Parking her car a safe distance away, she cautiously approached the house, her heart pounding in her chest, each step echoing her growing anxiety.
It was a Friday night, and I found myself navigating the bustling city streets, the rain adding a layer of complexity to my drive. Rain lashed against my windshield, blurring the neon lights into an impressionistic smear, making it hard to see clearly. My phone buzzed with the familiar chime of a new order, and I glanced down, expecting the usual address from a regular customer. But the name that flashed across the screen was unfamiliar. It simply read M, a single letter that seemed to carry an air of mystery.
Now Sarah had dealt with her fair share of odd requests and strange customers in her time on the job. She'd once delivered a single black coffee to a cemetery at 3 a.m, and another time a pizza to a guy who answered the door in a full hazmat suit. But there was something about this simple, single-lettered name that sent a shiver down her spine. It was as if the lack of information itself was unsettling, a blank space where a face and a story should be, making her feel uneasy.
Despite the prickle of unease, I reasoned with myself. It was probably just someone trying to be funny, or maybe they were new to the app and didn't know how to properly fill out their profile. Shaking off the feeling, I accepted the order, the address leading me to a part of town I rarely frequented. A labyrinthine network of narrow, winding streets lined with old, imposing houses. The rain seemed to intensify as I drove, the rhythmic thump of the wipers doing little to dispel the growing sense of unease that had settled over me. Each house I passed seemed to loom larger and more imposing than the last, their windows dark and unwelcoming. I tried to focus on the road, on the familiar routine of my job, but a nagging feeling lingered in the back of my mind. This M, whoever they were, felt different, like a shadow had fallen over my otherwise ordinary night.
The GPS led her deeper into the maze of narrow streets, each turn seeming to take her further from the familiar and deeper into a sense of unsettling isolation. The houses here were different from the modern, brightly lit homes she usually frequented. These were grand old structures, their facades weathered and worn, with deep porches and ornate detailing that spoke of a bygone era. Many stood shrouded in darkness, their windows like vacant eyes staring out at the deserted street.
Finally, the GPS announced my arrival at my destination, 13 Blackwood Lane. I pulled up to the curb, my headlights illuminating the house that matched the address. It was an imposing structure, 3 stories high and built in a style that hinted at a time long past. The paint on its wooden siding was peeling, and the wrought iron gate leading up to the front porch sagged wearily. The windows, like those of its neighbours, were dark, and an unsettling silence hung over the property. For a moment I hesitated. The rain had intensified, and the wind howled through the trees lining the street, creating an eerie symphony of sound. The house seemed to press in on me, its silence almost a tangible presence. I considered calling the customer, just to break the tension, but something stopped me. It felt like an intrusion, like shining a light in a dark room and risking seeing something you wished you hadn't.
Taking a deep breath, Sarah grabbed the delivery bag and stepped out of her car, the slam of the door echoing loudly in the stillness. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic that sent a shiver down her spine. It was an unsettling aroma, out of place in the quiet suburban street, and it did nothing to ease the growing sense of unease that had taken root in her gut. As Sarah made her way up the creaking steps of the porch, the wind seemed to pick up, whipping strands of hair across her face and sending a shiver down her spine. She raised her hand to knock, but before her knuckles could connect with the wood, the door swung inwards with a groan as if inviting her in. The entryway beyond was shrouded in darkness, the only light emanating from the street lamp outside, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor.
Hello?
Her voice was hesitant, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence of the house. The air inside was heavy and still, thick with the smell of dust and decay, like a place long untouched. There was an unsettling stillness to the house, a complete absence of sound that felt almost unnatural. No hum of appliances, no ticking clock, no distant sounds of traffic, just an oppressive, suffocating silence.
Holding my breath, I stepped cautiously across the threshold, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath my feet, the sound echoing through the empty house like a whispered warning. The air grew colder as I moved deeper into the house, raising goosebumps on my arms. It felt as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees the moment I crossed the threshold, the air becoming thick and heavy, difficult to breathe. The hair on the back of my neck prickled with a sudden, inexplicable fear. It was the feeling of being watched, a sensation that sent a chill down my spine and made me want to turn and flee back into the relative safety of the storm outside. But something held me there, rooted to the spot by a mixture of fear and a strange sense of morbid curiosity.
Hesitantly, Sarah took another step forward, her hand reaching out to brush against the wall for balance. The wallpaper, once grand and ornate, was now faded and peeling, cobwebs clinging to its damp surface. As her fingers brushed against the wall, she felt a sudden, sharp jolt, like a static shock, that caused her to recoil her hand instinctively. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. Looking around, she tried to rationalize the strange occurrence. Perhaps there was a loose wire somewhere, or maybe it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Well, that's it for tonight's stories. I hope you enjoyed this glimpse into the unsettling world of food delivery horror. Remember, these are just a few of the countless strange and unexplained encounters that delivery drivers experience every day. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more chilling content. And remember, always be cautious when you're out there delivering food. You never know